Search goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer. The elements involved today included psychiatrists, astrologists, and police guards for school buses. Terry Drinkwater reports.
School children are nice targets. I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, shoot out the tires, and then pick off the kiddies as they come bounding out. That was the threat of the Zodiac Killer. Now, every day, police cars follow the buses which would be likely targets. Officers armed with shotguns take the threat seriously. The psychotic killer has already murdered 5. One at a lover's lane near a lake just north of San Francisco. 3 others in nearby Vallejo. The latest, a taxi driver in San Francisco. The Zodiac Killer seems to crave publicity. He sent letters and cryptograms to newspapers and the police, recounting his crimes, threatening more murders, and making Bay Area residents very edgy.
In his violent movements, or rather the violent periods that he has been in, he's an absolutely ruthless, completely merciless killer. He calmly goes about his business of, in one case, telephoning the police, and another tearing a strip off the shirt of the dead body of the immediately killed victim. He doesn't get great excitement over it. He just he thinks killing is just killing. So somebody like that is going to be a very serious problem for us.
From witnesses, there are 2 generally similar composite drawings. He's around 30, reddish hair, 5 feet 10, crew cut, but not much more than that is known. Today, a meeting of lawmen and psychiatrists from all over the Bay Area. They are weighing advice from astrologers on the theory that perhaps the killer, who calls himself the Zodiac, may be planning his next victim based on astrological signs.
My guest this afternoon, author Mark Hewitt, is the foremost expert on the Zodiac Murders, having written 3 books on these unspeakable murders. Book 1, Hunted, the Zodiac Murders. His second book, Profiled, the Zodiac Examined. And his third book, the Zodiac Revealed. He joins me this afternoon to talk about this infamous Zodiac Killer who terrorized San Francisco more than 50 years ago. Mark, first of all, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
You're welcome.
So, I mean, most people, like, maybe your age or my age, I mean, they would be like Frank Sinatra and maybe do some research on Frank Sinatra. How did you get into the Zodiac Killer? I mean, how did you get obsessed with him? Or her?
Well, I first encountered the Zodiac case by reading Bob Graysmith's book back in 1980. He was the first person to write a publicly available novel story on the Zodiac. It really fascinated me. I didn't put much. I was interested in the case. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it, but it wasn't until 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, that I got very interested in the case. I started discussing it online with a variety of other individuals, a number of different message boards online, and found out that there was quite a community of people who were fascinated by the case. The more I got into it, the more I found it was absolutely fascinating, with all kinds of twists and turns. To me, it was a rabbit hole, but it was a series of rabbit holes.
So Mark, why don't we just get into it? December 20th, 1968 is supposedly when the Zodiac Killer first struck. Tell my audience a little bit about the crime scene and what actually happened that night.
Sure. The Zodiac actually is known to have killed 5 people across 4 crime scenes, but there are many other potential crimes that could have been perpetrated by the Zodiac both before and after that date, or after that spree. December 20, 1968 was the death of 17-year-old David Faraday and 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen. The couple went to park at a turnout, a kind of a lover's lane spot in a very remote area. And there were no eyewitnesses to what precisely happened, but apparently the perpetrator, who later claimed to be the Zodiac, pulled up and shot David Faraday in the head and shot Betty Lou Jensen 5 times in the back as she was fleeing the scene. In and of itself, that particular crime scene became a very high-profile case within California. It was unsolved, and they couldn't figure out what was going on until it happened again 7 months later.
Now you mentioned the gentleman David. Is this the murder where he actually went back to shoot him?
No, that was the next one.
Okay.
The Blue Rock Springs Park.
Okay, now who discovered the bodies?
A woman who was out doing an errand. She was going to pick up her son. She drove by the scene and saw a station wagon and with what looked like two bodies that had fallen out of the vehicle. She raced into Benicia and notified the police, and the police responded to the scene.
You know, like I said, we're talking 1968, late 60s, Mark, and obviously you know as well. You know, the police really, there was no term serial killer. The closest thing back then would have been the Jack the Ripper. So they really had no clue what they were dealing with at this time.
Yeah, it was termed a mass. Well, once it became a spree, it was called a mass murder because that's the only thing that they had to distinguish a lone incident from a series of incidents. The term serial killer wasn't coined until the 1970s.
So we talk about the Zodiac Killer, the term Zodiac. How did this name come about? Because I know the research I've done, that the papers called him so many different things, and I don't think he was too crazy about that. How did that come about?
It's a mystery why exactly he chose that name. But in the press, he was called the Code Killer or the Code Slayer. And at one point, he sent a letter, and the first line of the letter was, "This is the Zodiac speaking." And that created fear in the whole region. People didn't know what it meant or where it came from. It sounded like a position of authority, somebody with godlike qualities. It created such a stir that the perpetrator, whom we now call the Zodiac, repeated it in every subsequent letter. Every one of his follow-up letters, well, almost every one of his follow-up letters began with the words, "This is the Zodiac speaking."
And how many letters in total was sent to the police?
It's still up for debate. Approximately 20. There are different letters that some people say, "Oh, that's absolutely a Zodiac letter," and other people say, "No, it's not. It's obviously a fake." At the time, there were hundreds of letters sent to the police and left as notes for other people, and it was kind of a joke back then that, you know, oh, ha ha ha, I'm the Zodiac, you're the Zodiac.
Right.
So it's hard to say exactly how many, but police think approximately 20 have been identified as Zodiac letters.
So obviously, you know, the writings, we've seen the movie, we've seen them online. They were structured obviously in a way that we don't know. But there was one letter that was ciphered.
Yeah, within the Zodiac mailing, there were a total of 4 different ciphers sent. Ciphers meaning a series of symbols that challenged the perpetrator, challenged the public and the press and the police to break the code and understand the underlying meaning. Only the first code, what's commonly called the Z408, the 408 character, 408 symbol cipher, was the only one that was broken. 3 additional ciphers were sent. The second of which, the Z3, the second one remains on the FBI's top 10 list of ciphers that they would love to crack, but it has been tackled by enthusiasts and supercomputers and computer scientists and whatnot for 50 years, and it still defies being broken.
How did they interpret that letter? I mean, who broke the code?
There's a school teacher and his wife living in Salinas, California. They spent a weekend trying to figure it out, and they liked puzzles, and they thought this would be kind of a little puzzle to work on, and with some concerted effort and a little bit of wisdom and some luck, they were able to pull out the solution.
And
it wasn't all that complicated of a code. It was a simple substitution cipher. You know,
Right.
each letter stood for a letter of each symbol stood for a letter of the alphabet.
And from what I've read, the authorities actually thought that the school teacher was the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah, there are people today online who swear that the school teacher who solved the code must be the Zodiac.
Poor guy tries to help people out and they want to throw him in jail.
Yeah, that's right.
Mark, I mean, a lot of, obviously, the murders themselves, the Zodiac Killer seemed to focus on, like, the younger kids, anybody under 30 years old. Do the authorities or anybody know why he focused on, like, you know, the Lover's Lanes or what I think about when I hear Lover's Lane, I think of Inspiration Point from Happy Days, that type of atmosphere.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea. And it was always couples, at least for the first 3 attacks, and then he killed a cab driver in San Francisco. So it remains to this day a mystery why he targeted the victims that he did. One guess is that was the people that he could kill in a very remote area and get away with it. That he was always able to escape into the darkness following all of his attacks. Another idea was that he was upset with couples that were engaging in amorous behavior that he wasn't able to. And he was very lonely and rejected by women or whatever.
Did the FBI back then, did they have a profile on him?
Profiling was just beginning in the early 1970s, and so the case was the investigators in California reached out to the FBI for assistance, but the FBI never held jurisdiction over the case. John Douglas said that one day the case was put in front of him and he was asked to create a profile, and then suddenly, before he had much time to put any work into it, it was taken away from him. He doesn't know why it was given to him or why it was taken away from him. No FBI profile has ever been released, though John Douglas and others have taken a stab at it and published books recently, in the last 20 years, giving their attempts at trying to solve the case, trying to describe the perpetrator.
Mark, tell us my audience, you can set up the second set of murders for my audience.
Sure. The second one happened about 7 months after the December 20, 1968. It was on the 4th of July, 1969. It was only about 3 miles away from Lake Herman Road where the first attack occurred. That's the one you mentioned where possibly Darlene Farron, 22 years old, was with Mike Majot, who was a few years younger. They went to this park area and went in and parked their car, and there were a few vehicles in the parking lot when they were there. A car came in and pulled up and stopped behind them. A very unusual stance, almost looked like a police stance, where the car was at the ready to take off or do what was needed. And it just parked there for maybe a minute. Then the car left. And presumably that same car came back about 5 minutes later, but there is the possibility that it was a different car that drove in 5 minutes later. But this second car pulled up behind them as well, and a spotlight came on. Well, the 2 young people thought that it must be a police officer making a routine check and finding out what was going on and who was there. So the 2 started to get their driver's licenses out to identify themselves and, say, hey, we're not causing any problems here. Whatever, something I guess was more common back in the 1960s. But the perpetrator got out of the vehicle, walked over to the passenger side where Mike Majot was sitting, and opened fire on the car. No words were exchanged, contrary to what we see in the David Fincher 2007 movie. No words were exchanged. The perpetrator walked back toward his vehicle, at which point Mike cried out or yelled or made some kind of loud sound. The perpetrator turned around, went back to the same window that he was at, and fired 2 more shots into Darlene and Mike. Darlene was dead on arrival. following that attack. But Mike Majot actually survived. It was a miraculous that he survived with, I believe, 4 bullet wounds. But he was rushed to the hospital and underwent surgery and was saved.
So, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong. So, 5 murders in total. How many people survived? Just Mike?
There were 2 survivors. There was one more survivor at the next crime scene.
Okay. Now, what did he provide, Michael? What did he provide to the authorities?
Not very much. He said that everything that he was interviewed a number of times. He was interviewed in the hospital right after the attack, and at the time he said, it's kind of I'm giving more impressions than exact descriptions of what I saw and what I heard. He didn't feel real comfortable with what he said. He said he didn't get a good look at the perpetrator. He only got a profile view of the face, and even that was after dark and not very good lighting. But he was able to give a general height, general weight description, and anything that he has said subsequently has been marred because Mike went through a lifetime of alcohol and drug abuse. So he's been interviewed, within the last 20 years, and what he says about the case shows that he has no real recollection of exactly what happened.
Is he still alive?
As far as I know, he was featured. He was interviewed for a documentary that went along with the director's cut of the movie Zodiac, and already there you can see that I think he's in his 60s, approaching 70 at that time, and he wasn't very coherent in what he was saying.
So that'll lead us to our next set of murders.
Yeah, the next one is probably the most familiar attack, and that took place at Lake Berryessa, September 27, 1969. And that's when Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard went for quote-unquote picnic, tend to be alone, went to Lake Berryessa, a huge reservoir up near Napa, and they sat by the side of the lake, and they were approached by this man who wore a square black hood, had a gun with him, and had a 12-inch long bayonet-style knife. And it must have been very threatening what they saw, this person with a hood on and weapons, and came out from behind a tree training a gun on them. But he spent all of his time trying to calm them down, saying that it's okay, it's not a problem, I just want your car, I just want your money. Cooperate, nothing's going to happen to you guys. And so they weren't afraid. They gave him what he said he wanted. They only had a little bit of money, but he left the money there. He never took the car keys that he asked for. But he hog-tied the two. And once he had them hog-tied and lying on their stomachs on the ground, he pulled out the bayonet knife and started stabbing first Brian in the back, 6 or 7 stab wounds to his back. He played dead, so the Zodiac turned away from him and started attacking Cecilia, who by that time was screaming and yelling and rolling around. She sustained 10 knife wounds, 5 to the front, 5 to the back. She died 2 days later. She slipped into a coma that day, died 2 days later, but Brian miraculously survived despite having these stab wounds in his back.
And obviously he provided the information to the authorities about the costume.
He did, and one of the big mysteries of the case is why the costume.
Right.
Because obviously he wanted the 2 of them to be dead, and if they had both died, neither of them would have been able to report on the costume and the interaction, the conversation, whatever. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about that particular attack.
One might think that maybe, like you said, he used a knife, so obviously he's not using a gun, and maybe he wanted to wear a costume because he said maybe if I don't kill him and stab him enough, one of them will survive, so I'll wear something to protect me. Because he did, I want to get into the weapons that he used, because he did switch out the weapons, which is highly unusual.
Yes, he never used the same weapon twice.
I mean, is that unusual in your research of a serial killing?
It is atypical. You look at somebody like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam in New York,
Right.
the same 44 caliber handgun in every one of his attacks, because he's got the weapon. Why go buy another one? So either this guy was extremely cunning and wanting to throw the authorities off by changing up his weapons, which means that he likely destroyed them after each attack so that they wouldn't be traced to him. Another theory is some people say that there was no Zodiac and these were completely random attacks by different people for different reasons, but somebody started writing letters and connecting the dots and saying, oh no, that was mine, I did those. That's a very difficult theory to hold once you look at the details of the cases and begin to see that what was taking place was an explainable series of attacks done by a particular serial killer who was accelerating the pace of his kills over time, because they started off with a large distance of time between the attacks and they became closer and closer together.
I want to ask you, Mark. I mean, obviously, a lot of media attention now. What was going on in the Bay Area as far as the residents were concerned? I mean, were they locking doors? Were they buying dogs like they did with Charles Manson? They would buy all these German Shepherds. Was that the case in your research?
I'm not aware of any increase in gun sales, but I know it was a topic of conversation throughout the Bay Area. A lot of families were very afraid. Kids were told not to go parking anywhere, obviously. And as it became a wider and wider territory that he was claiming, in fact, the next attack took place in San Francisco itself, people became very afraid that anywhere in the Bay Area was not safe. So people were afraid. Police were on high alert. There was great fear at the time. I don't know about gun sales. I have never heard anything on that.
Interesting. I'm sure they bought a lot of dogs. They cleaned out the kennels.
I know one reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac, and he got afraid, and he talked to the chief of police and was granted a permit to carry a weapon, and so he was carrying a weapon for about a year after that.
Mark, there was also some audio. Who did he call?
He made 2 telephone calls into the police. The first one after the Blue Rock Springs attack. It was about 40 minutes after the attack took place. He called in and said that he called in and took credit for the attack and described where they could be found. But by that time, the police were already aware of the attack. And then the second time took place.
Go ahead.
The second one took place after the Lake Berryessa attack. The perpetrator drove into Napa and called the Napa Police Department from just a couple blocks away from the police department. And both of these took place at payphones.
Oh, so they did try to trace it.
They did, yes.
And they ended up being a payphone. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
And they took print from the payphones, and they talked to anybody who was in the area to see if anybody had seen anything. They did get some prints, but there is a question whether those prints are actually the Zodiac, because public payphone, obviously, there's going to be a lot of people coming in and out.
In terms of any DNA from the Zodiac Killer, in terms of the body, anything on the bodies, anything from him?
The closest that they've been able to do is to try to find DNA from letters that were sent by the perpetrator. If he licked an envelope flap or licked a stamp before putting it on, DNA would be possible. 2002, they tried to find some DNA, and they thought that they found a partial print. There's questions about whether that was actually Zodiac DNA that they found or not. And then 2017, 18, when the Golden State Killer was arrested, and he was identified through a genealogical match of DNA.
Right.
It was reported that Zodiac letters had been resubmitted to the lab to try to, once again, to find the DNA. And no follow-up to that has been announced by the police. And some people are very excited and think that since there's no news, they must have found a profile and they must be trying to search the DNA databases and look for matches and construct genealogical tables and whatnot. And some people even say that there's word on that coming out of the police department, but it's just rumor at this point. I'm a little bit more skeptical.
Now, Mark, the Golden Gate Killer, I believe his name was, correct me if I'm wrong, D'Angelo. Did the authorities ever speak with him to see if he had any information? Maybe he was in the area at the time?
Yeah, he's been called the Golden State Killer.
Oh, Golden State. What did I say? Golden Gate. Yeah.
He was arrested a couple of years ago in 3 high-profile cases that became merged as one. And upon his arrest, there was some speculation that maybe he was the Zodiac too. If he did 3 campaigns of serial killing, maybe he did a 4th as the Zodiac. The authorities were never able to connect him, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of promising information that he had anything to do with it. But there are some people who still believe that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, my opinion, he has the age. He was a police officer. Am I correct?
He was a police officer. The factors that suggested he wasn't the Zodiac were he was very into raping people. He was into terrorizing a community. He was into, what he did was very personal and very close to the perpetrators, none of which the Zodiac did. Joseph D'Angelo sent no letters to the police and the press, was not looking for publicity as far as anybody could tell. So just as far as signatures go, there's very little to connect him.
Mark, in your book Profile, you construct a psychological profile of the Zodiac Killer. How did you come up with that based on your research?
Profiled, as my second book of the Zodiac serial killing trilogy, looked into the whole topic of serial killers. I studied FBI reports and FBI research into the whole phenomenon of the serial killer. And they have put out a number of papers to help people get an understanding of what a serial killer is, what the different types of serial killers, and what their different motivations are. And in my work with the Zodiac, I went beyond that. And so the book Profiled is an excellent book just in understanding police procedure and serial killers, who they are, what makes them tick. But from that, I constructed a profile based on eyewitness reports, based on police reports, and based on what the FBI now knows about serial killers. The FBI work on serial killers actually took place after the Zodiac had stopped killing. And so not a lot of FBI attention was put to it. Not a lot of expertise from the FBI in what they now know about serial killers has been transferred back to the Zodiac serial killing case. And so I was able to do that and came away with maybe 150, 180 points of evidence that I think that make that help us to understand who he was, what he was, basic age range, size, but also some psychological characteristics of what it was that he was attempting to do. It's of course speculative. No profile is ever 100%. Generally, when a perpetrator is captured, they go back and look at profiles and find out that many of the points were entirely wrong or completely mistaken. And I suspect that would be the case with mine as well. But it did give me an opportunity to try to take a stab at who I thought the Zodiac was and what type of person he was.
All right. Mark, the closest the police ever came to naming a primary suspect was Arthur Lee Allen in the 70s. What led them to Arthur Lee Allen?
John Lynch was the first one to interview Arthur Lee Allen, and he did that in 1969, but he later on could not recall why he was led to that individual. Somebody tipped them off to that name. So he doesn't recall who it was or why it was that he went to talk to him. Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect and really the only suspect that the police had for all of the 1970s. He was the best suspect they had, but he was basically the only suspect. And what seems to have happened in retrospect is that Arthur Lee Allen got off on needling the police and giving them a hard time, and a lot of the information they had against Arthur Lee Allen was actually provided to them by Arthur Lee Allen, as though he was taunting them, saying, yeah, maybe I am a Zodiac serial killer. Not a lot of people today believe that Arthur Lee Allen had anything to do with it. He spent time in the Atascadero Mental Hospital because of child molestation, and there's no indication that the Zodiac serial killer had any interest in children, any interest in child molestation. So it seems like, apart from liking to brag and apart from interest in taunting the police, Arthur Lee Allen didn't have a whole lot in common with the Zodiac.
Yeah, because he was like you say, he was like a braggadocious type of guy, outgoing personality. Probably wouldn't fit with the Zodiac.
Well, that was the biggest thing for me when I began to research the Zodiac. I came to see him as a more cerebral, quiet, somebody lurking in the shadows, somebody who watched from afar, somebody who wasn't gregarious, somebody who wasn't successful, and that's the typical profile of a serial killer. They tend to be ineffectual in every area of their lives. They go about kill people, and it makes them feel powerful, it makes them feel effective, it makes them feel normal, or it validates who they are as a person. Well, Arthur Lee Allen had none of that. He had no need to gain recognition or no need to become validated, because if he ever wanted attention, he would walk into a room and he'd immediately know how to become the center of attention.
Right.
He was gregarious, he had a verbal diarrhea of sorts, and so he's not the person who would sit at a desk for 2 hours and carefully construct a cipher and send it to the police. It just wasn't in his character.
Yeah, it makes sense. It does make sense. Mark, so the last known murder of the Zodiac Killer happened on October 11th, 1969, like 51 years ago. Do we even know that these were the last murders? The last murder?
It's the last one that we can confirm as being a Zodiac letter, because...
Other words, sorry to interrupt. Other words, did it just stop after that?
As far as we know, it did. He cleverly wrote in a letter that he was going to change the way that he, in other words, killed people. And he said he wouldn't announce any more of his victims. It was clever if he wanted to stop killing and leave the police forever wondering if he did stop or not. Because after that, any traffic accident, any murder-suicide, any other death had to be considered as, gee, maybe this was the Zodiac carrying out his threat of changing his way of killing people. So, but as far as knowing for sure that it was a Zodiac murder, the murder of Paul Stein is understood as the Zodiac's last.
He was the cab driver.
He was a cab driver. The Zodiac picked up a cab in downtown San Francisco in the theater district and took it out to Presidio Heights, a very ritzy area of extremely large and expensive homes. And when the cab driver pulled over to the side of the road, he pulled out a gun and shot him in the head.
Gee.
What makes us know that that was a Zodiac attack was that the perpetrator cut off part of the tail of Paul Stein's shirt, and in subsequent letters he actually slipped a piece of the bloodstained shirt into the couple of letters. letting people know that, yes, this is a Zodiac letter, and yes, this murder was perpetrated by the Zodiac. Of course, there are other people who say, oh, no, he got somebody else to commit the murder, and then he got the tail of the shirt. Or else people have even speculated that, it was an inside job, that somebody got a hold of the evidence locker in SFPD and got a hold of that shirt and then began sending it in. Both of which are rather difficult to... They're interesting theories, but very difficult to substantiate.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense.
The current understanding is that the Zodiac was nearly caught following that murder. He was accosted by a couple of police officers a couple blocks from the crime scene. And the current theory is that he was so afraid that he was nearly caught that it scared him straight and scared him from committing additional murders, at least in the same way that he did by showing up in person.
Interesting. Mark, your third book in the Zodiac trilogy, the Zodiac Revealed. I know there's some stuff you can't talk about it, but talk a little bit about it if you can.
I can talk about whatever you want to.
Oh, okay. Oh, you want to reveal? You want to reveal? It's up to you if you want to reveal the who.
Well, absolutely.
Okay.
Through my research, I've become convinced that the perpetrator is Theodore Kaczynski, a.k.a. the Unabomber. There are a number of reasons I think that. It wasn't something that I just pulled out of the air. This is following numerous years of studying the case. But when the Zodiac went quiet following the murder of Paul Stein, he changed to a couple of different topics in his letters. First of all, he began sending more letters, which leads people to believe that he wasn't killing anymore. He was focusing more on his correspondence. But he began to talk about the topic of children, and he threatened with 2 bomb diagrams. Now, the bomb diagrams that he threatened with are passive detonation devices. In other words, they are a bomb set, but they are triggered by somebody who goes and acts on it, whether it be a car driving by will cause, a bus driving by will cause the bomb to detonate. And the Zodiac letters, as far as we know, ended in 1974. So for 5 years, almost 5 years, the Zodiac was sending letters but not killing. The Unabomber emerged in 1978, began killing people with bombs through the mail. Now, a lot of people say that's highly suspicious because we know about the Unabomber. We studied him after Ted Kaczynski was arrested and incarcerated. He killed because of his fear of technology and his hatred of the system that he felt was bearing down upon him. Unfortunately, a lot of what we know about Ted Kaczynski and the Unabomber, we know because he has told us that. And a serial killer isn't obligated to tell the truth. The Unabomber went quiet for about 6 years in part of his bombing spree, and John Douglas, the FBI profiler, concluded that 2 things were taking place when he went quiet. Number 1 is that he was testing and improving the quality of his bombs. Number 2, he was working on a justification for why he was murdering. Serial killers kill because they want to kill. There may be other things involved in that, but primarily that's their thing. They're addicted to the act of killing people. So for Ted Kaczynski to tell us that the reason he killed was because of technology is not very believable. You know, think about it. His message is, I'm so afraid of technology. I'm so concerned about what technology is doing to society and to other people and to me that I need to fight out against it. And the only way I can get my message out is to kill somebody. Well, he set bombs and he mailed bombs for 17 years without saying a single thing about technology. It wasn't until 1 year before he was arrested that he released his Unabomber manifesto. And if anybody has read the Unabomber manifesto, you realize that, yes, he talks about his concern for the technology. And he believes the philosophy that he's providing in the manifesto, but that's not his motivation to kill, I don't believe. Very often in the manifesto, he takes a detour and starts talking about children, a child this and a child that. Well, if you understand him on a psychological level, you realize he's talking about himself. He was very unhappy about his childhood. He felt that he was abused in his childhood, that he was pushed too hard academically, that he didn't learn social skills, etc., which he all blames on his mother. But the point is, his topic became bombing and children. The Zodiac topic became bombing and children following the end of his murder spree. And Ted Kaczynski is very involved in creating and sending bombs and was concerned about his own childhood and railed against society and what society was doing to children. I see a strong tie there. In all, I've collected a whole catalog of evidence that seems to implicate Kaczynski.
Fascinating.
And it's kind of arranged in 6 or 7 constellations. So, it took me an entire book to lay out all the evidence against Kaczynski.
Let me ask
remember,
you this.
Here's a guy who
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. No,
I was going to say, when he was a child, as a child, he was evaluated to have an IQ of 167. And that puts him in the area of Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking. That is an extremely high and extremely rare IQ. When he was in Berkeley as a professor, he resigned his position in 1969, 4 days before his last day of work was 4 days before the Blue Rock Springs attack. He knew that people in the area were aware of his handwriting. Some people had known him, and so he had to disguise his handwriting. He had to disguise what he was doing in all these letters that he sent to the police.
Right, that's why.
10 years later, he was in Montana. He didn't need to disguise himself anymore, he thought. It wasn't until his sister-in-law turned him in that he realized that, I did say a little bit too much about myself, and that's how he got caught. But Ted Kaczynski had a 2-year span in his life. It's kind of a missing 2 years. He quit his job at Berkeley in 69, and then in 71, July of 71, he shows up in Montana, building his cabin and living in Montana. Well, during that 2-year time where Ted Kaczynski cannot be placed geographically, there is some evidence that he was in certain places, but even that is up for debate. But during that missing 2 years of Ted Kaczynski's life, that's when the bulk of the Zodiac attacks and the Zodiac letters took place.
Fascinating. Because I was going to ask you, because he's such an highly intellectual person that the letters that he would make spelling errors that a 5-year-old can do. So maybe he's trying to throw him off the
Zodiac
track.
letters.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe he's trying to throw
Even
him
back in the 60s and 70s, investigators knew that the Zodiac was smarter than he was letting on. He did spell firing, F-I-R-E-I-N-G.
Right.
And he spelled kids, C-I-D.
Wow.
He wrote in a really messy script that looked like a grade school student. However, in one of his letters, he uses 3 semicolons, and he uses them exactly correctly.
And those are tricky, those semicolons. Those are tricky. Those are real tricky.
Yeah, and he uses them absolutely correctly. So it tells us that he's more educated and he's more intelligent than he's letting on.
So in all your research, obviously the book, what we're talking about, you think 100% Ted Kaczynski was the Zodiac Killer. Are you 100% of that?
I have said to people that if I'm proven wrong, I would have to relook at what's taking place, what evidence there is against somebody else. But at this point in my research, I can't understand the Unabomber spree apart from the Zodiac killings, and I can't understand the Zodiac killings apart from the Unabomber spree. They fit together as the Zodiac Ted Kaczynski was acting as a proto-Unabomber.
Hmm.
He had some of the same messages. Well, look at his phrase that was never understood: collecting slaves for the afterlife. That's what the Zodiac said he was doing. People have said, well, what does that mean? Where does that come from? Well, if you look at the manifesto, you realize the term slavery is used over and over again. That humans are slaves to the system.
Right.
That the
Yes.
system is enslaving us.
Yeah, and
His real enemy within the political spectrum was leftists, which he called collectivists. So there you have slaves and collecting. If somebody is collecting something, they could be gathering things, but it could also be making collectivists out of other people, collecting slaves. And also in Ted's philosophy of life, he believes there's going to be there's a coming collapse of technological society. Either it's going to happen soon or it's going to happen later. Whenever it happens, all of life on planet Earth is going to be affected. It's going to be huge biological, and it's going to be an apocalypse. It's going to be a catastrophe. And he thinks a lot and he talks a lot about what happens after that takes place. Well, that could be what the Zodiac was referring to when he's talking about, when I die, I'm collecting slaves for my life, collecting slaves for when I die.
Fascinating stuff, Mark. Mark, unfortunately, we're going to wrap this up. Tell my audience where they can get your trilogy on the Zodiac. Where can they buy your books?
My trilogy, Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed, is available through any bookstore or Amazon.com, or any online bookseller will sell them. You can also check out my publisher's website, geniusbookpublishing.com.
And you have a website, drhewitt.com?
drhewitt.com, and you find links to purchase the books or to contact me.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I wish we could talk for another hour because this is really crazy. It's great. Real quick, are you working on anything right now?
I am working on a couple more books currently. I'm working to republish my book on Charles Manson. I am looking to preparing my memoirs. My story as a Zodiac hunter, all of the interesting people that I've met and interesting experiences I've had along the way. And I'm working on a biography of Ted Kaczynski.
Wow. And when do you think those will be rolling out?
I have no idea. My memoirs are nearly finished, but I don't know if the time is right to publish them or how much editing I'm still going to need to do over the next coming months. But I expect in the next month or two I will be done with it for the time being.
Let me ask you one more silly question, Mark. Did you ever try to visit the Unabomber in prison?
I corresponded with him in prison.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I write about that in the third book of my trilogy, Exposed. Some of the letters that he sent me were gave an impression, gave some of the similar wording that I received from that occur in the Zodiac letters. And in the final letter that he sent me, he found out that I was a Zodiac researcher. Curiously, he never accused me of writing him because I thought he was the Zodiac. Obviously, the only reason that I would be writing him, he didn't mention that. But he did use the word Zodiac. And his printed use of the word Zodiac is similar to the use of the word Zodiac in all of the Zodiac letters.
Wow. Oh, wow. Fascinating stuff, Mark. And, you should be commended for all your work because I know it's tedious work and very difficult work. And it's amazing that you thank you for sharing this with my audience because this is really, really deep stuff. And I really highly recommend everybody check out these books, this trilogy on the Zodiac. Visit drhewitt.com, HEWITT. This has been great, Mark, and thank you so much for your time, and keep plugging away.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
All right, Mark, we'll talk to you down the road. Thank you so much. Be safe. Take care.
Okay, bye now.
Bye. Bye.